Okay, hello, good morning, everyone. We are moving on to the panel session. And the purpose of this session is to discuss clinical research from the perspectives of clinical research investigators, a research coordinator, research pharmacist, research program manager, clinical research participant, and somebody who sits on an IRB, which Dr. Rouse mentioned earlier. Institutional review boards are a group of people who get together to review possible research and give their approval for the research protocol. So we're going to have these people sort of answer questions. Some of you have already submitted questions that they will be responding to. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. We have an excellent group of people that we've put together for this panel. And I am going to ask, if you are sitting on the panel, it is okay for you to turn your camera on at this time. I will begin with Rosalind Randall. Rosalind Randall has been a clinical research associate at Baylor College of Medicine for almost 15 years. She's worked with several cancer treatment trials, several registries, and is currently working on CAR T-cell treatment therapies. She's a native Houstonian and enjoys serving the youth at her church. Next, we have Ana Dulce Hernandez Herrera, who is a project manager for a cancer-funded grant at Baylor College of Medicine. She has been working in research for at least 12 years and has clinical research experience focusing on education and clinical trial enrollment of Hispanic, underserved, and vulnerable populations. She is also a hospice volunteer, birth doula, and a sheepdog steward. Dr. Celia Fencer-Roy is an investigational drug services coordinator for Harris Health Systems. She is a graduate of Texas Southern University with her PharmD degree, and she worked in the pharmaceutical industry before she took this role, where she ensures that clinical trials are carried out effectively, safely, efficiently by managing that investigational drug products. Dr. Dominique Gwynn has experience as a research participant, and she currently teaches at Texas Southern University in the Department of Health, Kinesiology, Sports Studies. And her research interests are in HIV/AIDS, cardiovascular disease, medication management, but she has personal experience being part of a clinical trial. So I will let her talk a little bit more about that. And you all have met Dr. Rain Rouse, who spoke with us a little bit earlier. And in this context, she's going to talk to us about being a member of an IRB review board. Dr. Courtney Miller Chisholm is a native Houstonian and is an assistant professor in hematology oncology at Baylor College of Medicine. And she attends on the inpatient and outpatient clinics at Bentop and Smith Clinic. She is the program director for Hematology Oncology Fellowship, a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, a wife and mother to an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. And Dr. LaQuisa Hill is an assistant professor of medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. She is board certified in internal medicine and hematology oncology with expertise in stem cell transplantation and cellular therapy. Her primary interests are the treatment of blood cancers, using cellular therapy and complications of these treatments. While she's not working, she likes to travel, spend time with family and friends, and indulge in being a foodie. So if all my speakers would please turn on their cameras and we can stop sharing so we can see them well. Awesome. Okay, let's see if I can make this a gallery view. Okay, I think that's better. That way we can see everyone's face at the same time. All right, thank you all so much for being here. I'm just gonna start it off because I know we are crunched for time and there's so much we want to know and so much we want to share. I am gonna start with Dominique. Is it okay if I use first names? Yes, yes, okay. You guys are awesome. All right, Dominique, I'd love to hear why you decided to participate in the clinical trial.
In short, it was my best chance for survival. In November 2016, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, pH positive, a gene that makes the leukemia cells grow faster. I initially was treated at St. Luke's, but moved to MD Anderson because, and they made it very clear to me, they had two hands and I needed more than what they had. But when I got to MD Anderson, they let me know that, the success rate for my cancer, had increased from 14% 5-year survival rate to about 71% because of a new class of drugs. And, they offered a clinical trial to me in a wonder drug called ponatinib. And I mean, honestly, when I presented Dr. Ndefo, I was, I was in bad shape. So that it was my best chance for survival. 20 years before, my daughter had participated in a clinical trial. So I was aware of the safeguards, the legislation. So I was educated when I went in, but again, it was my best chance for survival.
Thank you. Yes, I think for a lot of people, it is that question of, what other choice do you have? But there are other types of trials too. There are other types of clinical trials that are not necessarily for people who are sick or people who have a specific condition. So I would like to ask Courtney, when you have clinical trials, what kind of patients are you looking for, or when you're conducting clinical trials?
Sure. So that's a very good question. Every clinical trial has something that's called inclusion criteria. And what that means is that for that particular trial, it has been determined the characteristics that you want in the patients that are being evaluated for whatever it may be. So in the event that you are testing a particular drug to see if it's going to be effective, it depends on the diagnosis. So one, you would need to have a diagnosis that's specific for that particular trial. There's typically an age range. So if this is a pediatric clinical trial, then you would want that to be specific for kids. But if it's for adults, then the age range would be specified. But often it's like 18 to 65. And sometimes elderly patients may be excluded, or maybe it's going to be a trial that's specific for elderly patients. A lot of times we're looking for patients that are in healthy condition, that have good organ function. But again, all of those things depend on the inclusion criteria. So it's a very dependent on whatever's being tested. That's in cancer world for sure. There are other clinical trials, such as if we're trying to test a medicine for high blood pressure, then of course you would have to have the diagnosis of high blood pressure. There may be other characteristics that may be very important that this particular trial is trying to evaluate. So you always have to be mindful of what that inclusion criteria may be. I think one thing to specify is that with our patients who are entering clinical trials, and as clinical investigators, we always want our patient population or a study population to look very similar to the actual prevalence of the disease. And I think what we find, especially in the cancer world, is that there are certain cancers that are fairly prevalent in African Americans or Latino patients, but we're not seeing that reflected in our patient population. And that's why we really want to see more minorities, so that we can have that study population look a lot more like what we are seeing in the real world, to make sure that these patients are, that what we're seeing in the studies are reflective of what we're going to see in our patients, particularly our minority patients.
Thank you very much. That's a great transition to my next question. Dr. Hill, you're a research investigator. How do you recruit patients? What's your process like for that?
So my first name is Lakisa. I don't want anyone to think, getting special treatment here. For me, as an oncologist, that process is probably a little different compared to researchers that are recruiting healthy volunteers or healthy patients. So typically, those patients are recruited via maybe flyers, whether it's paper flyers, news paper flyers, radio announcements, occasionally maybe even things that may have short clips on TV. A lot of the recruitment that I utilize is actually through my colleagues in the field of oncology. And so essentially when we have a trial that we're opening, we start spreading the word amongst, it starts usually with the people at our center because those patients are local. They're the easiest for us to get our hands on. They will refer patients to see us. And then we discuss with colleagues at other centers, which may be here locally in Houston and often is from other states. There's also a website called clinicaltrials.gov that actually lists every clinical trial that is approved or in the process of being approved for activation for any and all disease types. And so often family or patients themselves find that website, and it is open to the public, and they will go on there and search for trials that are relevant for their disease, and they will reach out to us. So Dr. Rouse and I run several studies together, and we often will get emails from family members, our patients themselves that have found our study even before their physicians know about it. And then they're able to loop us in with their treating team, and we can go from there. And then, most of the trials that we do are early phase 1. So those studies where we're really looking at safety more so than efficacy or how well it works. But as we start to generate data and treat more and more patients on those studies, then we present that data at national meetings and conferences. And then that starts to get the information out even more broadly to again, mostly colleagues, but we get referrals even internationally just from presenting data at some of these meetings where the audience is much larger, much broader.
Okay, so I love that, because what I hear is that I can find studies that are related to me, myself. So if
Absolutely.
I'm interested in participating, I can go to clinicaltrials.gov. I can look for this information and I can bring it to my physician and advocate for myself. Okay, so that's a very key piece of information, because I think a few people have asked that question in the chat today. So thank you so much for that answer.
You're welcome.
Anna, we've talked about participating in clinical trials. How does clinical research benefit minority communities? Why should we be looking to increase that minority participation? What are y'all doing to help increase that minority participation?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. So the first thing is knowledge is power. So when the community participates in these clinical trials, it helps to produce knowledge that is applicable back to the community. So that's one of the first things that I see as a benefit of participation. Another thing is for underserved populations and minorities. Sometimes these communities need more hand-holding during their process. And so when you're in a clinical trial, you have a research nurse, a clinical coordinator, sometimes you have a doctor on call that can help you. So the main focus is for them to make sure that you're safe, but also sometimes they act as navigators and support, even emotional support for these patients. So that helps the patients to feel a little bit better. Another way in which we benefit is because sometimes we need to feel like whatever process we're living through of disease or hardship, it has some purpose. So when I participate, I'm generating this knowledge that may not help me directly, but it can help my community along the way. So that's kind of like the ways in which I see the participation can help the community. Also, you build a rapport with the medical community that brings trust back to the community, which is very important for health outcomes. What I do, I'm here today this morning. I have been a translator, I have been a coordinator, I have produced materials, I try to stay engaged. Right now, my position at Baylor is outside of the clinic, so I'm helping on the preclinical part of studies. So I'm making sure that whatever tissues was donated by patients are being used for the purpose that they were supposed to be, and pushing the preclinical trials. And I keep myself engaged and try to educate myself, my community, my husband, providers. Sometimes the providers need different perspective, right? So I try to use my voice to like keep pushing all the research moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very important, is that we can all serve as ambassadors in our regular lives, in our real lives. We can, encourage the people around us to participate if they hear or if they're interested. And Jocelyn, I'm going to ask you the next question. What measures have you found effective and encouraging, just like, we just talked about, but what measures have you found to be effective in encouraging eligible patients to participate? So I know I'm eligible. How do you, get us to look over some of that murky history that Dr. Shudik had talked about at the beginning of experimentation in underserved populations?
Most of the time, I try to be really, really honest with my patients. So I start off with honesty, and I ask them what's stopping them. What's your question? I ask them what things are on their mind that's making them hesitant to continue to do the trial, to sign up, to move forward. And I try to just go from there. And when I do that part, it usually opens the doors for the conversation to lead to where they feel comfortable, and then also giving them enough time to not feel pressured. This is not a race. We want them to be comfortable, agreeing to put your care. I'm an intermediary, I'm here, but I want you to be comfortable dealing with the doctors. So I just try to make sure they know that every question is going to be answered. There's okay to have questions, ask the doctor questions, and just start off just like that, because I'm usually the first person to kind of grease the patients, and I prep them for the doctor. And then I want to make sure going in, if they're nervous and they're uncomfortable, I want to make sure I pass that off to the team so we can keep that going. So usually that works, just giving them that time and that dedication sitting down.
That's awesome. I feel like that's necessary for any clinical trial that's being conducted, to have someone like you there to sort of help build that information, or bridge that information gap, if you will. Rain, you serve as an IRB member. So is there a regulatory mechanism, I guess, in the clinical phase 1, 2, 3 trials to ensure diverse population participation in the trials before the FDA approves a product?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Such a good question. So every time we receive a clinical trial that comes to our review board to review, we expect that they have included a plan of how they will ensure the population is diverse. You can imagine that that may look a bit different depending on the disease, because if you're studying a disease such as multiple myeloma, which does disproportionately affect African Americans, you can expect that there may be a predominance of African Americans. If you're studying a disease that is more prevalent in one population than the other, there's not a rule that says you have to enroll exactly the way the population lists, but there are actual questions that researchers have to answer and have a detailed plan about how they will ensure that the recruitment is diverse, including ensuring that the informed consent is translated to other languages, ensuring that It is in understandable language. Now, importantly, even when you seek funding for your research, the National Institutes of Health has specific questions for even bench researchers about the diversity of your mice, for example. You can't study all male mice or all female mice, and you have to have an explanation. So this is important because it starts at the earliest time point. And there was a great question in the chat about someone who's new to cancer research disparities and thinking about how you can be the most impactful. We need to have a seat at the table. So when Doctors Miller and Hill and I are sitting down, when Jocelyn and I are sitting down and we're looking at patients that are there, when Anna is looking at at tissue banking, we're wanting to make sure that we say, hey, is this representative of the population? Do we have African Americans? Do we have enough of the Latinx population? So starting, it's been actually very enheartening to me to see that this process is starting much earlier, which is starting with bench researchers, starting in animal model work, because you have the groundwork set to ensure that when you roll this out to patients, it absolutely is mirroring our diverse population. We've come a long way, and for good reason. And we're still recognizing the way that we have to go.
Thank you. Thank you. So that is really helpful for us to understand everything that goes on sort of behind the scenes. Dr. Fenseroy, study has been approved.
Yes.
Right. And you are at Harris Health Systems and study's been approved. It gets presented to you. What do you do when that study gets assigned? What happens then? How do we kick it off?
Well, here's the other part of the background to the research. So our role is to step in and actually look at the drug that's going to be investigated and determine feasibility and resources that are needed to make sure that how do I dispense this drug and make sure it's dispensed safely and effectively. So I sit down, I start looking at all the teams that are actually involved. We consider ourselves to be a liaison between the principal investigator and the coordinator and the sponsor. Everybody knows their roles, but not everybody knows what each role entails. So I double check, I'm making sure that there's appropriate labeling. I'm making sure that we are following all the guidelines in regards to regulatory agents. Key thing is safety. You know, patients have rights, medication administration rights. So my job is to make sure that the trial is ethical. The trial, there is a consent form on file for the patients. I'm looking to make sure that it's going to the right patient, right drug, right dose. Even if it's blinded, there are trials where they're double blinded. There are trials where I'm the only one who's aware of what's being dispensed. So we have a key role in there. And biggest thing is mostly just making sure everything is done appropriately and orderly from a safety perspective.
Okay, that helps with that level of comfort about what's going on. But a follow-up question I have for you. Since we're based in Houston, Harris Health is, you know, a giant in Houston. How do I find specific opportunities to participate at your institution?
That is a great question. We have a lot of research going on at Harris Health Systems. So we actually have a department called the Research and Sponsored Programs. So from a provider perspective, they could actually reach out to that department, Research and Sponsored Program. That would be at research@harrishealth.org. Or patients who are actually coming in to see their providers, I would ask them to talk to their caregiver and say, are there any clinical trials going on? Harris Health is considered one of the top institutions in regards to research and just the patient population. We have such a diverse patient population, so there's a lot of research that goes on because we see how many patients could benefit in the community. So it's a great place. So I would suggest from a patient perspective to reach out to their provider and ask them if there are any clinical trials that they think that they could possibly benefit from. In my opinion, in my team's opinion, we always say that anybody who participates in research, those are the true heroes, because these are patients right now. COVID is going on. We wouldn't be where we are right now if it hadn't been for people who are taking the time to want to do something for themselves, but also just help mankind. So research is key, and we appreciate any and everybody. The young lady who spoke earlier, we truly appreciate her stepping up and doing research.
Thank you. Thank you. That is awesome. I just saw a comment from Latarsha C. Dr. Gwen, thank you for sharing that. You have no idea how you just touched me in my studies and personal endeavors to fight on for health and wellness. So you are already making a difference. Anna, I have another question for you. Is clinical research, do you find that in our minority communities, that clinical research is still considered controversial or not seen in a good light? This is a question that was actually submitted by one of our attendees. So do you find that it's still controversial and still not seen in a good light in our
Of course it is,
community?
and we have seen that's how we opened this morning, right? There are historical reasons why some communities don't trust the medical system. So you have that, for example, for the African American community, that you have to acknowledge that. You cannot say, oh, you know, we have changed and this is, no, you have to stand to where they are and try to understand where they're coming from. So yeah, there's still some like barriers for communities to join clinical research. That's African American, for example. Like in my community, we have in Houston a big Hispanic community that is concerned about migratory issues, right? So like if, as we just saw it on the video, like if I sign for this, is this information gonna be shared with the government? Are they gonna come and look for me after? So that's another thing that we need to acknowledge, and is a barrier for like my community to join clinical studies. Also, we have to acknowledge that we have different ways of life. Some people cannot take the time to attend the extra visits for clinical trials. They don't have the transportation. They don't have payday leaves from work. So they either go to work and feed their families or attend clinical trials, right? So in that context, it's like a very complex task that we have in front of ourselves, but we should understand all that complexity and try to facilitate. And I know that from like being have experience as a clinical coordinator, we try our best to like facilitate. We create educational things. We give like transportation vouchers. We call the family so they don't forget. Like we do all those things to try to bring the communities closer to medical research, because it's important for all of us.
Thank you. That's very important. And based on that answer, Dominique, I want to ask you this. Should people expect to get paid for being in a clinical trial?
I was not compensated for my participation in a clinical trial. However, I want you to look at it like this. I was given access to a drug at no cost that Blue Cross Blue Shield now pays $30,000 for monthly. Also extensive testing. And I'm here to tell the story today because of. So to me, that was all the compensation. Now, there are clinical trials that reimburse participants for time and travel. University and research groups do compensate. But no, I didn't receive any compensation. Honestly, I didn't expect any. My compensation was just, I'm here. And something else I'd like to add, 3 weeks ago, I attended the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's, their blood cancer conference, one of the community events that Ms. Erica was speaking of. And I heard there was a physician talking about my cancer specifically. And, I was kind of scared listening because he talked about, just the raw statistics, 5-year survival rate, but here I am year 6. And he talked about MD Anderson, the wonderful research they were doing, ponatinib, and then he talked about minimal residual disease, which is what I have right now. And he talked about, the game-changing medications for that. Well, that medication is something that was offered to me 3 years ago. So I feel like I am getting first dibs almost at groundbreaking drugs. And that's the fact that I'm here is compensation enough in my.
Okay, that gave me goosebumps. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let me see. Let me go back to my notes because I got lost in your answer. I wasn't even looking at my papers anymore. Okay. Where are we? Let me gather myself. That was very impactful. Thank you.
While you're looking at your notes, can I make a quick comment about that also? I think we all, every time you speak, Mrs. Gwen, I think we all are kind of get goosebumps, and we are so appreciative as a leukemia researcher, and many of my colleagues on here are as well.
I thank you.
Thank you, because we wouldn't be able to do it without you. And you are a strong advocate for patients. You are a strong advocate for research teams. And we learn everything that we learn from people like you. And hallelujah to 6 years. I also just want to add that if you are being asked to participate in research where there's no potential benefit to you, often the IRB will require that there's some compensation, or if it is something that will be quite strenuous to your schedule, for example. So if you're asking a healthy college student to come and do sleep studies multiple times throughout the week, they typically will require that you receive some sort of voucher. So it's important to know that depending on the circumstance, it may or may not be appropriate for you to receive compensation, and that compensation could be a Starbucks gift card, or it could be paying for your parking, et cetera. So I don't want anyone to think it's an inappropriate question. And also, even if you are receiving a drug free of cost, if there are additional study visits that will be disruptive to your life, you have your kids at home, you have to do this. We all know how expensive it is to park in the medical center. There's nothing wrong with asking about resources, because often, even if you are not paid, you certainly can be compensated, and that is only appropriate, as Anna so gracefully put it.
And Ms. Russ, I'll add that part of, your care and services, the social work team comes and shares the different resources with you. I remember getting an actual a card to take care of, my parking and different things like that. So there are resources out there and available for you. And they do, I know that my care team, informed me of all of those.
That's really important to know. You got me with the parking, because parking at the medical center hurts my heart every time. So yes, very, very important. Lakisa, somebody asked, I feel like in my 24 years of life, a young person, obviously, my family has never been reached out to participate in any type of clinical research. Is this rare?
No, I would say that's probably common for most of us. I mean, and it really just depends on the goal of the clinical trial and what the purpose of it is. Most people are not sought out unless they happen to have some type of illness, which they're under the frequent care of a healthcare provider or healthcare team. But usually, especially when we're younger, we don't have a lot of medical problems. Hopefully, we're not really going to the doctor frequently, maybe just once a year for your routine visit. So, and these trials, they have lifespans. So one trial may be open that you might have potentially qualified for as a healthy participant, but if you weren't seen during the lifespan of that trial, it may have closed, and then it's no longer an option for you, and so your provider might not bring it up. So I would say absolutely that it is not unusual, and it is not a rare thing. Most people don't get approached about participating in clinical trials, and the ones that are targeting, observational or trying things in healthy patients, those are usually advertised somewhere, usually on academic campuses or university hospitals, where they have the resources in terms of research and financial, a grant funding to provide those studies. But in the general community, it doesn't really tend to happen, and that's okay. That's totally normal.
And I will also just add that even advertisements for studies have to be reviewed by the institution.
Yes, have to be approved by the IRB.
Appropriate. So even if you want to do like if you wanted to do a radio ad on TSU's radio or TV station, it would have to be approved. And also, if you are having a study, especially one that might compensate, because we were all very rich in college, right? So we would never sign up for a study. So you have to ensure that it's very clear that there's no coercion and that it is not going to affect a student's ability to pass a class and things like that. When you are actually pulling from the research pool of people that are at a job or an institution. So great answer, Dr. Hill.
Thank you very much for that. And it's a great segue into my next question, which is for Jocelyn. How have you organized your most successful engagement feedback from minority communities? How have you been able to pull in that hard to reach community for any of the studies that you've worked on?
Basically, again, honesty. I kind of sit down and I talk to them and address things from my personal standpoint, as if they were my family. You know, people have questions, people are nervous, people are scared, people don't like going to the doctor. And all our patients, this is a totally new journey, new chapter in their lives, and they need some assurance of every person they come in contact with. So I definitely try my hardest to let them know that I understand. I'm here, and let me take your hand, take my hand, and let's walk together. And those are the ways that I find more successful and easier for all the patients that come through. They just need someone to take a little time, making sure they make making the right decision. They're so nervous about research or new treatment options or anything new, wanting this to be the new thing in the last. They're just taking a minute and having that breather with them, and communicating has always kind of worked for me.
And I just want to point out how special it is to see all of these shining Black and brown faces who, as you can imagine, going through the healthcare field and navigating, whether it's a leukemia diagnosis or hypertension, and having the door open and Jocelyn come in or Anna come in, Dr. Hill, Dr. Miller Chisholm. And I'll say that Dr. Hill and I work very closely with Jocelyn, and to have Jocelyn as the coordinator and then to have patients encounter an African-American doctor like myself or Dr. Hill has been a quite special experience. Mm-hmm. And I will just reiterate what Dr. Pandit said about the pipeline and ensuring that we have diverse research teams, whether it be the doctor, the study coordinator, the social worker, the tissue bank administrator. We have to ensure that we have people that look like the population that we're serving.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. I think it would definitely help to be able to hear and see this information from people who look like us. Courtney, what's your favorite thing about being a research investigator?
I would say that it's really beautiful when, in addition to encountering patients and taking care of patients, that we're able to learn new information. I think in the world of medicine, the knowledge is growing, and it's growing exponentially, in fact. And so when you have that opportunity to be involved in acquiring knowledge from these patients, I think that's very gratifying. I would say in general for me, one of the reasons for even wanting to go into medicine was really all about caring for the patient. And even with my role, I'm not really a primary principal investigator of a trial. Like, I help with them. I don't really design the trial. So I'm just someone who would kind of have more of a secondary role in helping with enrollments in clinical trials. But it's a beautiful thing to be able to just take care of patients, and to take care of patients in the setting of research, where not only you're caring for the patients and their medical problems, but truly learning from them as well. Obviously, we have the books that we learn from, but the way that we get the knowledge in the books is from the patients. And so to be in that process is very rewarding. And as everyone has said to you, Dominique, we're so grateful for you and what you have contributed to how you have contributed to our science and our growth of knowledge.
Courtney, I think absolutely the boots on the ground, like I think that you guys are the most important ones connecting, because those of us in academia, we write and we have theories about these things, but y'all's role in the real world, actually enrolling and treating the patients is super, super important. I feel like I need another hour to get all my questions out. So we just have to talk about how to continue to have this dialogue. I have one last question and I'm gonna have to turn it over.
Can I piggyback on that one, just say one thing? And again, I think Dominique is sort of like a poster child of why we do this, why we participate in clinical trials and run trials, and we always want to have these success stories, but a lot of the patients that Dr. Rouse and I treat, they have a different form of lymphoblastic leukemia that is a T-cell driven leukemia, and the prognosis is very, very poor. And so even the patients who are on our trials that we unfortunately can't cure or don't help in the way that we think, they're also so appreciative and really grateful and thankful because of the core of how our team operates and the care that we provide for them. Even if it's just for a short 6 weeks on our study, you would think they knew us for 6 years, 10 years. And patients really appreciate that and are grateful to have even been able to participate. And we're grateful because we learn from the patients who don't respond as well. So, we love these home run stories, but oftentimes for us in the oncology field, that's not always the case, but we still learn something from every patient that we treat on study.
Thank you.
And develop amazing relationships with
that's
patients.
That's super important to know that even if it's not it doesn't end up with a pretty bow on it, that there's still a lot of benefit to get from that. My last question is for you, Rain.
Okay. Right before, let me say one last thing because it's so important. I think Dr. Miller Chisholm pointed out something that's so important. A lot of times patients feel like if they're enrolling on a study, let's say you were receiving your care at Methodist or at St. Luke's, and then you went to MD Anderson and you have a new study team, you're not required to sever all ties with your physician, nurse, and trusted team that you had at your home institution. And they are often the most important. So I encourage all of my patients, and I encourage you to be empowered, that if you come to see me, and I'm talking to you specifically about a team, I want to engage your primary care physician. I want to engage the team that was taking care of you before. And they often are there to really kind of have an unbiased relationship and ability to continue to provide care. So that's one of the biggest things is we often, Dr. Hill and I, we borrow people from their trusted healthcare team, but we make sure they understand we're borrowing you and we're added to your team, but we're not taking you away. And we certainly want to keep your healthcare providers engaged, and we trust that you trust them, and will often seek out their expertise as well.
Awesome. That is very important to keep in mind, so that people don't feel like they're giving up one for the other. So that being able to work together. My very last question for you, Dr. Rouse, is I'm not sick. I don't have anything like this sounds interesting. I want to contribute to science. I want to, contribute to the information that's out there used for minority health, but I'm not sick. I don't have anything. Is there any way that I can still participate in some of these things?
Absolutely, especially when you're here in Houston. So one thing that is super simple is you could go to Google and type in clinical research for healthy volunteers in Houston, and you will get a long list. And it often will link you to studies that are going on at Harris Health, or even studies that are going on at Baylor, studies that are going on at Methodist. And these are often studies where you either may be a control group. So if there's a population that has diabetes, you may be the control group. They often are studies that are looking at the safety of a certain device. These are typically studies that you will receive some sort of compensation for. And that's why we kept talking about college students, because on college campuses, you'll see these flyers for these kind of short duration studies that you'll receive compensation for. To be very clear, these same studies are also reviewed by the IRB, often even more rigorously, because when you're dealing with healthy participants, and there's not any specific benefit to them, you have to absolutely ensure that the risks do not outweigh, and that the data and the science is there. So you can absolutely help. You can type it into your Google, and you'll almost be overwhelmed by the number of things. And one thing, if that's too overwhelming, you can Google Baylor College of Medicine or TSU. You can pick an institution and Google what they have going on there.
And Dr. Ndefo, may I also add another way, if you'd like to get involved, and you can Google community scientist. And that gives you an opportunity, it gives lay people an opportunity to go out in your community as, lay health leaders in your community, and educate others in the community, not just about clinical trials, but about vaccines, misinformation, distrust. So that's another way to get involved if you would like.
Awesome. All right. So everybody, wherever you are, please join me in thanking all of our panelists. We still have so many questions, so we're doing this again. We're doing this more often so that we can continue to have this dialogue. Thank you so much for giving us your time today to be able to do this. Because I'm corny like that, I'm taking a picture of the screen because there's so much girl power going on here, and I'm just so excited. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to the TSU Jazz Group, who is going to give us a brief performance. Thanks again, everyone, and I look forward to doing this again in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.